Welcome to the WP Builds podcast, bringing you the latest news from the WordPress community. Now, welcome your hosts, David Wormsley and Nathan Wrigley.
Hello there and welcome to the WP Builds podcast and Happy New Year 2021. If, like me, you had some time off during the last couple of weeks, I hope that you enjoyed it and managed to recharge your batteries. This is episode number 211, entitled It's Important to Get Your Grammar Right, and ProWritingAid will help with that. It was published on Thursday the 7th of January 2021. We are WP Builds, a WordPress-specific podcast network, and we'd be very happy if you headed over to wpbuilds.com to see what you can see over there. We've got heaps of WordPress-related content. Perhaps the best way to keep in touch with what we do is to go to wpbuilds.com/subscribe and fill out the forms. In that way, we will be able to email you and keep you abreast of anything that we create. There's also links on there to our YouTube channel and our very friendly Facebook group. So that's wpbuilds.com/subscribe. Whilst you're there, have a look at some of the links in the main menu, perhaps the deals link if you're interested in deals in the WordPress space. We've got a whole ton of them over there. And if you're interested in advertising on the WP Builds podcast and getting your message out to a WordPress specific audience, well, click on the advertise link, a little bit like A/B split test did. Do you want to set up your A/B split tests in record time, like in a couple of minutes? Use your existing pages and test anything against anything else. Buttons, images, headers, rows, anything. And the best part is that it works with Elementor, Beaver Builder and the WordPress block editor. You can check it out and get a free demo at absplittest.com. Okie dokie. What have we got in store for you this week? Well, this is a really interesting off-piste episode because it's not entirely related to WordPress. It is Chris Banks talking to me about a tool, a SaaS tool that he's created called ProWritingAid. Now, this is going to be for anybody who struggles in any way with writing content because this tool is a remarkable one-size-fits-all tool to help you with your grammar, your punctuation, your spelling, your style, and a whole lot more. On the podcast, Chris tells us why he developed this tool and also what it can do for you. Now, you may be interested to know as well that Chris has very kindly offered us 20% off ProWritingAid, and in order to avail yourself of that, you can click on the link in the show notes and be taken to a landing page specifically for WP Builds listeners. It's one of those tools that no matter how hard I try to explain to you how good it is and how many options there are, you're going to really have to go and take a look at this for yourself because it really does try to tackle a whole cornucopia of different things related to writing. So if you are writing and you feel that any aspect of it could be improved, I would highly recommend listening to today's podcast, hear what Chris has got to say, and like I say, click on the link in the show notes if you're interested and you can get 20% off ProWritingAid. I hope that you enjoy the podcast. Hello there. Welcome to the WP Builds podcast once more. Thanks for joining us. Today, we're going completely off-piste today. We're having a real tangent moment because we're not really talking about WordPress, although we will. We'll delve into WordPress aspects in today's subject. But I'm joined today by Chris Banks from ProWritingAid. Hello, Chris.
Hi Nathan, how are you doing?
Yep, very good, thanks. Now, before we get into this, I'm going to very quickly describe what ProWritingAid is, and then I'm going to get Chris to correct my errors, because that's what it's all about. ProWritingAid is a tool. I like that, by the way. I think that was... ProWritingAid is a tool to assist you to improve your writing. So come at it from a grammar point of view, or a punctuation point of view, or a spelling point of view, or just a style point of view. ProWritingAid enables you to retrospectively go back and improve the writing that you've already done. So, how did I do?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good summary. I mean, we look at it as kind of an AI-powered writing coach. So the idea is it's there to help you as you're writing. It's there to remind you of all those things that you learned in school but then forgot. It's there to remind you of all those things that you read in books about writing but then not being able to apply to your own writing easily. And And I think that's the perfect thing, right? Is it's giving you help and learning advice on your own writing, which is exactly what you need.
It's interesting that you said that, things that you'd forgotten at school. I, unfortunately, was educated in the era in Great Britain where grammar was supposed to be delivered, I guess, by osmosis. You were supposed to sort of imbibe the knowledge of grammar all by yourself. I'm not joking when I say that. I really do feel that grammar was kind of off the menu for quite a number of years. And so I had to kind of relearn grammar when I became when I wished to do some writing, because it became painfully obvious that those people around me were doing things, and I honestly didn't know what I was doing. But how does it work? I mean, what I mean by that is, what are we looking at? So it's obviously based upon a computer and a screen. Perhaps mobile devices can be thrown into the mix as well. I'm not sure. What's the process look like on your computer? What do you do?
So I think the key thing is we try and fit into wherever you're writing. So we have plugins for things like Microsoft Word, we have a desktop app, but most importantly for your listeners probably is that we have a Chrome extension, Safari, Firefox, Edge, which just plugs into your browser and then will give you help and information wherever you're writing. So if you're writing a blog post in WordPress, then you'll start to see highlights appearing that will correct grammar mistakes. They'll give you style suggestions as well, which I think is really important. So those are the kind of the typical suggestions that a copy editor would make, just to trim down your writing and make it a little bit more punchy. So we convert sort of what we call things like hidden verbs. So that's where you've taken a verb and turned it into a noun and then used a weak verb. So a good example is make a decision instead of decide, or make an announcement instead of announce. So we just convert those automatically for you effectively and say, it's better to use this phrase. So people tend to say it's like having a kind of friendly figure looking over their shoulder, prodding them, saying, you can improve this. What about this? So that's how it works, and wherever you're writing, it kind of follows you around. So I think that's the important thing as well about learning and improving, is it's having that constant feedback. So a lot of people have it in their email and they say, I never even thought about changing that. But as you use it, you then start to improve wherever you're writing.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way of describing it. In my case, it alerted me to the fact that I'm basically verbose. I choose too many words and I'm not economic with what I write. So, very often it'll highlight the fact that, well, you just don't need this, you don't need this or this. And I cross them out and it reads perfectly well after the fact. So that's really nice.
I think everybody is, because if you think about the communication you do, the majority for most people is verbal. So you're talking, right? And in talking, you have this time constraint while your brain catches up with what you're saying. So often you add in extra words to give yourself more time to think. And so then when you create these patterns that allow you to more time, so when you start writing, you start doing exactly the same thing subconsciously. So you add in all of this extra words, or all of these extra words that you don't need. And that's what we're doing, is trying to say, actually, you don't need all this stuff. When you're communicating in the written way, you can cut it all out, and it becomes much easier for your reader to read it, much faster for them to read it, and easier for them to understand.
Mm. Yeah, and what's interesting from my perspective is that I literally don't see it. I do not see the errors that I've made when I've read it back until I switch it on, and then it becomes blindingly obvious which words I've overused, and it's things. Just the repetition of it is extraordinary, and despite the fact that your tool constantly alerts me to the fact that I'm doing it, I still manage to do it. So it's great. The UI is such, and let's come at it from a WordPress point of view, and then we can maybe touch on the UI of other things. If you are lucky enough to be using WordPress and you have Gutenberg switched on, there's a really nice, probably somewhat accidental feature that ProWritingAid makes use of, and that is to say that each time you hit return on your keyboard, you begin a new block, and you'll be familiar with this if you've edited anything in Gutenberg. You write a sentence or 2 sentences, whatever, hit return, and you're into a new block. And ProWritingAid works via the Chrome extension on a block by block basis. That is to say, if you've written 3 sentences in one block, you get this handy little icon which pops up bottom right of the block that you're in. And it may show a sort of different colour indicating the severity of things that need to be changed and what have you. And you simply click on that and it will alert you to various things. Alternatively, you can just look out for kind of things that are underlined in various different colours. So, for example, there might be things underlined in blue or yellow, and they will be indicative of certain things that need to be changed, be it grammar or spelling or what have you. Do you want to just talk us through that process? What do we see as we're actually editing it? You know, what are the cues that you've provided for us to enable us to sort of quickly go through things?
Sure. So I think broadly speaking, we have 2 different kinds of cues. So we have what we call the real-time checking, which are the underlines that you see as you're typing. So what we've done there is we've taken the kind of core suggestions, the most important things, and we've made them available to you as you're typing. Obviously, you can turn that off as well if you don't want to be distracted while you're writing. But for shorter form things, people often like to accept those just as they're going through. And then we have a whole range of tools that allow you to go deeper into your writing. So if you're writing what we call like a higher value piece, so something that you're going to spend a lot more time improving, then if you click on the icon in the bottom right, then it brings up our full editor, and that allows you to run a lot more analyses that look at other things. For instance, we'll check your work for repeated words. We'll give you feedback on the structure. You can see readability measures for it all, and there's a range of other reports that will really help you go in more depth into your writing. So again, you know, if you just want quick fixes, then you have the real time, and if you want to go more in depth, then you have this whole other editor that you can use for that.
Yeah, and I confess I am not a consumer of any of the, you know, your competitors. What you provide is what I have seen, but I have to say, it is astonishing. So as it has just been mentioned, Chris said that if you click on the icon, you get this, well, pop-up, let's call it that. And it looks a bit like a Google Doc or a Word document kind of editor. And it places the text that you're currently trying to edit in a page, let's say. And then the range of things that you can amend, good grief. I mean, there's just too many to mention. There are... Well, let's go through them, because I believe that some of these are of interest to me, largely because I don't understand what they are. So what is style? There's an icon labelled style. What does that mean? What indication am I going to get from that?
So the style is some of the things that I said about the changes made by copy editors. Mm-hmm. And then we also look at a range of other things. So the style, a lot of it is really pertinent to people who are writing creatively. So I think that's another important thing to make, is important distinction to make, is that some of our reports are very much aimed at specific types of writers. So we have ones that are really designed for creative writers who are writing novels. We've got others that are very much used by content writers, business writers, and academic writers as well. So some of the things in the style won't be relevant to everybody, but others will. And it looks for things like adverbs. So I think that's one that comes up a lot. And there's a famous Stephen King quote about the road to hell being paved with adverbs. But I think this is a good illustration of my point about when you're writing, the first thing you're doing is just trying to get your ideas down on the page. And then the second part is to go back over those words and make sure that you're using the best words. So when you're doing the first page, it's fine to put down, the first thing that pops into your head, as long as it's conveying your idea. And that second phase is where you go down and you go back and strengthen what you've written. And I think adverbs are a good example of this, because what happens is you generally put down like a very common verb, like run, right? And then you think, actually, I want to change the meaning slightly. add a little bit of subtlety to it. So you say, okay, actually ran quickly, right? So you put that down. But actually, if you go back to it, you can think, well, actually, there's lots of better verbs that I could be using that mean exactly the same as run quickly. Like rushed, hurried, charged, cannoned, are all synonyms of that. And they, create a better image in your reader's mind than ran quickly. Like ran quickly just leaves you a bit kind of the.
Yes.
And we do this all the time. Everybody does it, but it's interesting to look at the number of adverbs that are used by published authors is very low, because they do tend to strengthen their verbs.
That's really interesting. Just as an aside on that, in terms of style, you purchase 50 different novels by 50 different authors, and they've all got a different style. Some of them might be very economic with their use of language. Others might be very prosaic or what have you. Is there any element of AI learning? Does it kind of figure out your style along the way? Perhaps that's a little too far advanced. I don't know.
Well, I think it's interesting because I think one of the worries that some people have before they start using is that it will take away their voice, that it will kind of make everything generic. And I think that, it's fair enough to think, but we don't do that, right? We're creating a positive feedback loop with you that's asking questions, but at the end of the day, it's you that's producing the writing. So regardless of whatever your style is, most people don't have a style which uses lots of adverbs, because it's not good for the reader, right? Most people don't, even if you say that they're prosaic, right? Generally, they'll still have a very high readability. It's just they're using different vocabulary that gives that impression of a more prosaic style. So there are still, underlying all of these different styles, there are basic rules of writing that will make your writing easy to read and impactful.
Yes, I can see why that might be a cause of concern for somebody who is, writing is their living, for an example. They don't wish to have their finely tuned, hard worked on voice squashed over the years. But nevertheless, it's like anything else. We do have rules that need to be obeyed. It's I guess if you're Jack Kerouac, you can kind of throw that all in the dustbin. But if you're somebody else writing a blog or what have you, you need to be readable and understandable. So okay, so that's what style.
I think the interesting thing is though that Jack Kerouac, everybody who is a successful writer gets feedback on their writing and changes their writing based on that feedback. So that might be a tool like ProWritingAid, or it might be beta readers who are reading through what they've written and pointing out issues with it. So I always think that, like even top level sportsmen have coaches.
Yes.
Right. The best performing people in the world, one of the reasons why they're the best performing people in the world is because they get feedback and they act on that feedback.
Yeah, it's a good point. And it is such a gentle little nudge, despite the fact that I said I seem to be able to completely ignore it. But then we move on. We've got other options here. It takes care of grammar. I don't feel that we need to dwell on that too much. It covers, I guess, the basics. It spots your apostrophes, full stops, and exclamation marks, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, exactly. So we check for hundreds of different grammar mistakes. And I think it varies between, as you say, people who haven't been taught grammar. So, for instance, haven't been taught when you need commas and when you don't. For me, one of the main problems that I have is that I am a terrible typer, right? So I will type form when I mean to type from. And because they're both valid words, most spell checkers won't pick that up. But what we do is we look at the context surrounding the word, and then we do what we call contextual spelling, so that we say, this is the wrong word to be using in this circumstance. And it's very easy to do for anybody, right? It's easy to type like violet when you mean like violent video games.
Yes.
Suddenly you're like, I really don't want my children watching or playing violent video games.
Which has a very, very kind of a very bizarre meaning, yeah.
Yes.
Anything with a sort of slightly purplish colour is verboten. Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. The voodoo behind all of this, though, the actual... Can we get onto that a little bit later? Because you just sort of glibly said we check the context before and after. I mean, like that's easy for somebody to just program ever so fast. We'll come on to that because I'm really fascinated by the tech stack going on here. But then there's moving across the menu item, there's a thesaurus, obviously, trying to provide alternative words for the one that you've used. Interesting one, and this is where I fall foul, overused words. I tend to just deploy the same word over and over again, so that's a nice one. I'm guessing it's literally looking for overused words in the passage itself, not overused words that it's worked out that you generally tend to use.
Well, what it actually does is it looks at phrases and words that inexperienced writers tend to overuse.
At the end of the day.
Yeah, exactly. And a good example might be the verb be. Often people overuse that when they should be using stronger verbs. If you imagine you using like the verb be or like is or was in every sentence, then it creates really sort of boring, monotonous writing. Lots of people also like to start sentences with ing verbs, so like taking this into account and seeing as blah, blah, blah. And suddenly you've got a piece that's filled with, 40% of your sentences start in this way. And again, it creates this bad feeling for your readers. So what we try and do is we benchmark it against published writing in your particular genre. And we say, okay, if you've overused this, right, we can tell because you've gotten X% above what is accepted or generally used in published writing.
That's fascinating. That really is quite astonishing. Yeah, interesting stuff. And then next door to that, I have literally no conception of what this menu means, but I'm going to say it. It says combo.
Oh yeah, so that's the advanced one.
That's why I don't understand.
No, it's because so obviously there's quite a few reports. I think we've got around 20 different reports, and people like to not have to go through all 20, but generally people will have their favorites. So the combo allows you to combine your favorite reports into one, so that you can just run it individually.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, it's just me, and I just tend to edit it on the fly, as I've described, so I never tend to sort of dig into the reports. Okay, then we've got repeats, where it will highlight things that you have repeated. And again, I'm going to illustrate my ignorance of the software. There's this thing called echoes. I can imagine what that might be, but tell us what that is.
So echoes is similar to repeats, but what it does is it looks for repeats within a certain period of time, also with a certain number of words. So this creates what we call an echo in the reader's mind. So, if you've used a phrase like you said, at the end of the day, and then you've used that same phrase 2 sentences later, then it creates a horrific echo in your reader's mind, and it really detracts from your writing. And it's one of those things that's so hard for you as an individual to spot that you've done that, because the phrase is kind of activated in your brain already because you've been writing it. Whereas the reader, that phrase becomes activated when they read the first sentence, and it's sort of still activated a sentence later, and then they read it again, and they're saying, oh, hang on a second, I just read that.
Yes.
So it's a great example of what computers can do very easily, but humans really struggle to do. Yeah,
interesting, because I see that in email all the time. I tend to consume fairly, I think probably heavily editorialized, if that's a word, content, newspapers and novels and what have you. And presumably somebody has inspected that, but doesn't seem to repeat too often in those instances. But in email, I get a lot of this, and you can tell that they've got certain tropes that they like to throw out. And you're right, it kind of creates that's a bit lazy feeling.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, and then we've got structure. Length, I presume we can all understand what that means, trying to gauge some kind of ideal length for certain things. What's just the generic structure button do? Is that just paragraphs and headings and whatnot?
Yeah, well, so this is actually looking at the structure of your sentences.
Okay.
It has two main functions. The first of which is to look at your writing and say, okay, have you? And again, it benchmarks you against published writing. So it will say, you've overused this type of construction in your sentence. So that might be, starting sentences with like and but, or it might be starting sentences with ing words, like we said, with seeing and speaking and like, talking. And it also, on the flip side of that, shows you where you haven't used certain structures at all. So as you say, right, you tend to have these kind of structures that you fall back on all of the time. But if you're only using 2 or 3 different sentence structures, then it's not adding much variety to your writing.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're scoring 0 on a specific type of sentence structure, then that's a good hint that you might want to start using that.
Okay.
So it kind of is there to prompt you to say, well, why don't you try writing some sentences that start like this?
Okay. Now, there are a whole bunch of other menus, and I think we probably could spend the entire rest of the podcast talking about them. I'll just very quickly say what they are. There's readability, sticky, cliches, which I think is really interesting, diction, pronoun, alliteration, homonym, consistency, acronym, dialogue, pacing, house, and I think fascinatingly, if you're obviously taking content from other people and publishing it online, plagiarism, which is interesting. Maybe we could dwell on that one. How do you gauge whether something is plagiarized or not? Are you sort of polling into Google or something?
Yeah, so it's effectively doing something similar to Google search, but obviously across your whole content. So the equivalent of doing thousands of Google searches to find out if your writing is plagiarized. And we also have a database of books as well that you might not find on Google that we go through as well.
Yeah. I mean, it's incredibly impressive, the amount of things that it's doing. I'm genuinely flabbergasted, in fact, by what it's capable of doing. I presume that the AI that's behind all of this is something that's you kept you awake at night. But before that, I was wondering, why on earth did you decide to spend probably a significant proportion of your life on this topic? Why grammar and punctuation and writing? Is this something you're deeply interested in? Are you a writer yourself?
It came about because I needed it for myself. So I think like you at school, I didn't get much feedback on my writing. At university, neither. And I think the interesting thing about university is that the writing you do in university is very different to the writing you do in the real world. And you're writing to show knowledge at university. Your tutors already know what you're going to say, so your aim therefore is to sound intelligent. Whereas when you then go into the real world, then actually your aim is to transfer knowledge. Your readers don't know what you're going to say, and the aim is to make them understand as easily as possible. And that's a completely different way of writing. So I was lucky when I left university and went into business that I had some mentors who spent a long time helping me to improve my writing. So that was great. And then I wrote research, and I thought, I'm a fairly good writer, brilliant. But then I started writing a novel, and I suddenly realized that actually writing a novel is completely different to writing research as well. So I needed something that was going to give me the same feedback that I'd had from my mentors at work, but about creative writing. And obviously I read lots of books about creative writing and kind of absorbed some of that. But it's very hard to apply that to your own writing. It's kind of very abstract and So I created this tool effectively to help me become a better creative writer. And so that's where we started, was in the creative writing community. But since then, we've kind of expanded and obviously applied the things that I learned as a business writer. We've expanded into content and also university writing as well.
Yeah. Yeah, it strikes me that when we're at school, we're all learning to write poetry and stories, and so you're going back to when you're very young. And I remember somebody asking me the question: how many poets does the nation need? Do we really all need to be churning out children who are great at poetry, or do we need to coach them into how to write, as you described, effective transference of knowledge? So it's really interesting. The one thing that kind of baffles me is that this tool, up to a certain point, it must have been useless. And what I mean by that, sorry, that came out as very rude. There must have been a certain point at which it was basically of no use. You had to build up the technology to a certain maturity. Otherwise, it would suggest things which were banal and pointless and what have you. And so how long did it take to sort of coach the algorithm to get the software to the point where you thought, actually, you know what? Inexperienced people can now use this and get fruitful information from it?
Well, it was actually surprisingly quick to do the first version, because we really focused on the things that are easy for computers to do. So, for instance, the repeats report, all it's doing is going through text and looking for repeated sequences of words. So that's actually quite easy to do.
Okay.
The sentence length, again, it's easy to count the number of words in sentences. And things like the readability is fairly easy to do. So we started with a sort of much diminished set of reports, but they were still actually quite useful for people. And I think, for instance, the sentence length is quite interesting because it gives you a graph of all your sentence lengths. And that visualization gives you a different way of looking at your writing. Suddenly you can see where you've used 4 really long sentences all in a row, or you can see where you've used a lot of sentences that are about the same length. That creates this kind of monotony in your writing again, which would be really hard to do in any other way. So those visualizations are quite useful immediately. So yeah, there is a lot of functionality in there, but it has just been built up over time. And my thing is just to kind of iterate, learn, as you're going, and eventually, we've been doing this now for 6 years. So
it's incredibly mature, even at the point when I began using it two or more years ago. Amazing, I was really bowled over. And as I said, I'd never come into contact with a tool that purported to do this. And just the flicking of it's in my case, logging into the account and then turning on the Chrome extension. Suddenly there's a world of, crisis, oh dear. It's not to be demoralized. It's more of and that's the thing. It's not actually doing the amendments for you. It's just making suggestions. Maybe there is an option in there, I don't know, where it will forcefully override what you've done and say, nope, this is right. I don't know. But in my case, it's just hinting that I'm an absolute disastrous writer.
Yeah, but I think the key thing we're trying to do is bring learning resources to where you're writing so that you can learn as you're doing it. And so we've been adding to all of the suggestions help that gives you kind of extensive examples of what the good and bad usage is. We have quizzes built in there. You can watch videos that will help you as well, because a lot of people relate better to video content. So as you're going along, you can learn about the mistakes that you're making, and hopefully, through that combination of reading and watching and doing, you will then improve. And that's one of the main feedbacks that we get from people, is that it's helping them improve as they're working.
Yeah, and that's the thing, right? There's just no situation in my life where anybody's ever going to be stood over my shoulder because, well, I don't have the resources for somebody to stand over my shoulder and hang on a minute, like you did at school. Your teacher sort of hovers and points things out and underlines things. It's just it's like a remote teacher in a way, just sort of sitting, hovering, and giving you information, and surprisingly quickly as well. That's the other thing. This is not a wait for 3 minutes or press a button. This stuff is happening in real time. So as you type the sentences that you're halfway through, it's beginning to make judgments upon what you're writing. It's absolutely fascinating. If you haven't tried it, really go and check it out. There is a free version, I understand. English only at the moment?
At the moment, yes.
Any plans to go elsewhere? I mean, I'm presuming, the Latin alphabet would be the first way to go. You steer clear of Arabic and so on, just for reasons of expediency, perhaps.
Yeah, I think Spanish will be our next, especially because I live in Spain as well.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that would be
happy coincidence.
Yeah, that would be great. That's interesting. So the languages that I can see available are British, English. These are all English. So British, US, Australian, Canadian. Sizable differences between those? Is it my imagination, or is it just spelling? It feels like only spelling, but perhaps not.
There's spelling and there's phrases as well. So a lot of words are used in different contexts depending on where you live.
Oh, yes.
I always get horrifically confused because I was educated in American schools and then moved back to the UK. And so now I really have no idea what is what.
Yes. The word pants comes to mind.
Yeah.
always a winner, that one. And then you've got general English. What is this? Some sort of hybrid of all of them?
Yeah, that's basically just we don't flag you up anything.
Okay. I think I'm on general English. I might have to change that. And then we've got this writing style option. I should say that I'm in the settings area. And this is fascinating because I swear I didn't even know this existed, and so this is interesting. So you've got the style of writing, and the categories are general, academic, business, technical, creative, casual, web, and script. Again, sizable changes. If I was to go for web over academic, for example, would there be a real difference to be noted?
So the main difference is, as I mentioned before, we benchmark against published writing in those areas. So, for instance, with the web, we've taken a selection of great articles from all over the web, and we use those for our benchmarks. And you'll also see some rules that change as well. So, for instance, with creative writing, people tend to use sentence fragments, so that sentences that aren't actually a full sentence, but they use it for stylistic reasons. So we allow those in creative, but we wouldn't allow them in, for instance, business and technical and academic.
Yeah.
So you'll see changes in the feedback and the numbers that you're trying to target. A good example might be academic writing. The use of the passive voice is much more acceptable and sometimes completely unavoidable. So we allow much more passive voice in academic writing than we would suggest is ideal in creative writing, for instance.
Interesting. Okay, now onto something a little bit more mundane and technical. So I'm typing away on my computer, and it's giving me suggestions. Now, the sort of tinfoil hat comes out at this point, and I start to think, okay, so it's reading what I'm writing, but what I'm writing is highly personal and of a nature that I would hate for this to be discovered. I'm writing something tremendously important. I am, in fact, a spy. How does it do this? Where's the data flowing to? Is it all done on the device itself? Does it go off to your servers and get fiddled with and then pushed back? How does it all work? I think what I'm saying is, how secure is this?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, and I think it's a valid concern for a lot of people. So we take privacy very, very seriously, and we have regular security checks by outside companies. We obviously have lots of business clients for whom it's very, very important, and so we have contracts with them around security. So we will never access your data. It's all transferred encrypted, and we never keep it or store it or use it for anything else. Whereas I know that some other companies that do grammar checking definitely do that and have that in their privacy policy, that they can basically use your writing for whatever they want. So it's important to check that. But yeah, so we are sending your text to our servers, and then we run a variety of machine learning algorithms on it to give back the suggestions, and then immediately it's deleted as soon as we finished giving the suggestions.
Oh, okay. So once that document, for example, so once the underlining has been done, if you like, and the decisions have been made by your software, then it just expunges that permanently, and then what, kind of writes over that portion of the disk, or just deletes it?
Well, it's all done just in memory.
Okay.
So we don't store it on the disk or in any kind of lasting way.
Okay. Oh, that is good.
And I think that's really important for us. And we do have, we have authors who are like, oh, I don't want you stealing my writing.
Yes.
But if you just think of the logistics of it as well, it would be impossible for us because, we're processing literally billions of words every day.
Wow.
So for anybody to be even able to read a small portion of that to check for something that's good writing that they might be able to take would be logistically impossible as well.
Yeah. I watch quite a lot of online tutorials, obviously in the WordPress space, and so you're literally watching other people's screens. And in my case, it's usually WordPress, and they are typing into Gutenberg and what have you. And it's really fascinating to me the proportion of people who are deploying this technology over time. Go back 5 or 6 years, as you say, you were just on your own, and then these tools came about, yours being one of them. And now I see those little icons hovering, and people, they obviously don't make use of it on the screencast that they're recording. But my point being that this feels like an area of growth. So I'm questioning you about that. Is your business is it growing? If, for example, at the end of this podcast, people were saying, do you know what? That sounds like a fabulous tool. Do you have confidence that you'll be around in 5, 6, 10 years and what have you?
Yeah, I mean, we're growing at a really fast rate, and I think people are coming to accept this more. And I think it is the way that learning is going as well. It's the future of learning at work is getting this feedback. As you say, right, you can't afford to have somebody sat on your shoulder who's helping you with everything. But companies can afford to have, one person who's creating a style guide for them that they then put into ProWritingAid, and then effectively every member of their team has somebody sat on their shoulder making sure that they're adhering to their company style guide, for instance. Right? And it's an investment in your team and your people, because I think, if you're running a team that's sending out emails or producing reports, as a manager, you actually find yourself spending an awful lot of time just correcting simple writing mistakes.
Right.
So if you deploy something like this for your team, then you save yourself a huge amount of time that then you can do and you can use for important things. And we get the same feedback from people in businesses, from academics, professors. I was talking to a professor the other day who was like, I'm a professor of physics and English isn't my first language, but I just spend all of my time correcting grammar mistakes and not actually giving any feedback on the content, the physics side of it.
Yeah.
And it's, which is the kind of feedback that you want, right? You want feedback on the content of what you've written, not the grammar. But sometimes there's so many grammar mistakes that's all that you can focus on.
Right. The waste of that man's or woman's brain power is just hideous, isn't it? It's got better things to be doing than fussing about grammar. Really, it's the content. Oh, that's really interesting. Do you have any reach into sort of education? Because it feels like, certainly at the schools that my children are involved with, there seems to be a push towards putting computers in front of children more and more, especially for writing tasks and what have you. And obviously at the moment we're in this kind of lockdown period. Well, we're not. We kind of are. We're in the middle of the summer holiday, actually. So who knows where that's going to go. But online learning has become a thing. And I wondered if schools on the whole were kind of adopting this kind of technology as well to assist the teaching.
Yeah, I think, a lot of schools now are using Google Classroom,
right.
and Google Docs for a lot of their writing, and tools like ours plug straight into that and give feedback that you just wouldn't be able to give, as an individual teacher to a large class. Right. And I think like contextual spelling ones are quite interesting. So, for instance, like where you have the word reign as in like the reign of a king, or reign as in reins of a horse, right? People confuse those all the time. They're spelt differently. They're pronounced the same in English. We'll highlight that, and then we'll give the students or whoever the user an article that explains the difference. We try and give you, little tricks for remembering the difference as well.
Oh, nice.
I think that's really important.
Yeah. So there's education materials in this as well. It's not just the UI showing you your mistakes that you've messed up so far. There's also sort of education.
Yeah.
How does that work? Videos, text documents, or?
Yeah. So on every time you have a highlight, there's a little information icon, and you click on that, and it pops up a window that gives you an article with videos, quizzes, and lots of useful learning materials.
That's amazing. I mean, it's a fully fledged tool for just basically picking you up off your terrible grammar mistakes and plunking you into decent ground. How expensive is this? What are your sort of pricing models? Do you have kind of multiple tiers? Let's say I'm in an agency of 15 people. Does it reduce in cost if I buy more than one license and so on?
Yeah, it does. So we have a Teams version, which allows you to put all of your team in, and then you get a bulk discount on that. But also importantly, it allows you to share things within that team. So for instance, as I mentioned, you can create a style guide. So for instance, lots of companies have specific rules about words that you should and shouldn't use. How the company name is spelt, for instance. So with ProWritingAid, we say you should never put spaces between the pro, writing, and aid.
Same with WordPress, yes.
Yeah, so you can create a rule that finds pro and writing and aid with spaces and changes it back to having no spaces.
We have a function in WordPress called WordPress Dang It, which it just automatically corrects it for you. Sorry, I interrupted.
No, that's exactly it, Ryan. So that is incredibly important for teams to have that. I think historically companies have spent a lot of money creating these style guides that they then want everybody to adhere to. They print them out, everyone's supposed to read them, but they just get put into the bottom drawer of your desk and then gather dust for the next 10 years. Whereas what we allow people to do is create a living and breathing style guide that then applies it as you're writing. So you're constantly reminded that, for instance, some people say you should never say like clients, you should always say customers or...
Oh, okay. Yeah, I get it. Yeah. The pricing that I can see on the screen is in pounds. Obviously, that's kind of internationalized me to figure out where I am probably. So I daren't mention what the price might be in dollars or US dollars or Canadian dollars or whatever it might be. But there is a monthly subscription. There is a yearly subscription, which at the minute is showing as 25% per month off, I'm guessing. Oh, yeah. And then there's a lifetime deal. Is that lifetime deal planned to stick around, or are you thinking you might?
So we always have a lifetime variant, but it is 25% off at the moment.
Okay, so that's a limited time deal that I'm seeing.
Yeah.
Right? Okay, so caveat emptor, you may not see that deal when you go to the website, but there will be a monthly, yearly, and lifetime subscription. It's prowritingaid.com. No spaces, clearly no spaces. It's a URL, but it's all as you would expect. prowritingaid.com, and yeah, go check it out. Anything you want to mention? Anything that we missed out? Any sort of promo stuff that you want to say? Twitter handles, email addresses, where you can be reached? Go for it, Chris.
I just say as well that we're all writers at the company, and we produce a lot of content ourselves, and a lot of free content. So even if you don't want to purchase the tool, then on our blog we have a huge amount of content helping people to improve their writing. We do regular newsletters that have a wide range of articles on improving your writing, and we've recently, during the confinement, started doing twice weekly webinars We bring in guest hosts who are experts in different topics on writing and give you free training. So if you go to our website and click on the Learn button at the top, you'll see all of that. And that's all for free as well.
Yeah, I would say that if you are writing yourself, this is totally worth it. But also, if you have an agency and you're being commissioned to build websites for other people, and you feel that there's a chance that they may themselves benefit from this, they're going to be writing, they're intending to be a blogger or what have you. You do have an affiliate program, so there may be something in that as well. If you're handing this over to your clients, at the bottom of the page in the About section, in the footer, you can click on the affiliate section. Just to say, because I don't think we dwelt on it too much, there is the Chrome extension, which basically will handle anything on the internet. It plugs directly into Google Docs, Microsoft Office, Scrivener, which is a really cool app for writing, which I bought with the intention of writing a novel and guess how many words I wrote. And then it will do a whole bunch of other things. They've got an API and what have you. So really fabulous stuff. If you're using a rival, maybe pause that one, go and have a look, ProWritingAid.com. Thank you, Chris, for your time. That's really appreciated.
No, my pleasure.
Well, I hope that you enjoyed that. It is a really interesting and powerful tool. So if Chris has made any sense to you today, if you've been beguiled by the things that he said and you're intrigued by what ProWritingAid can do for you, be sure to check out the link in the show notes and avail yourself of the 20% offer that he's offering to WP Builds listeners, which is very nice indeed. I use it myself. I switch it on whenever I create Google Docs, and I'm generally browsing on the internet with forms to fill out and so on, and I find it enormously useful. The depth and breadth of the tool is really, really rather remarkable. The WP Builds podcast is brought to you today by A/B Split Test. Do you want to set up your A/B split tests in record time? The new A/B split test plugin for WordPress will have you up and running in a couple of minutes. Use your existing pages and test anything against anything else. Buttons, images, headers, rows, anything. And the best part, it works with Elementor, Beaver Builder, and the WordPress block editor. You can get a free demo. Check it out at absplittest.com. Okay, we will be back next Thursday for an episode involving David Wormsley and I. We rotate the episodes. One week we do an interview, and the following week David Wormsley and I have a chat about something to do with WordPress. We're going through the A to Z or A to Z of WordPress at the moment, and we're still very early in the alphabet, so join us for that. Also, restarting after the Christmas break, I'll be joined by Paul Lacey and some notable WordPress guests for the live This Week in WordPress. That happens every Monday at 2 p.m. UK time. You can find that at wpbuilds.com/live or in our Facebook group. That's wpbuilds.com/Facebook. And then, of course, we produce the newsletter each Tuesday following on from what we chatted about in the live that I've just mentioned. You can subscribe to all of this at wpbuilds.com/subscribe. Okay, as is customary, I'm going to fade in some cheesy music. I hope that you have a lovely week and stay safe. And all that remains for me to say is bye-bye for now.